December 24th, 1994, 7:30 p.m. Princess Diana stood at the tall windows of Kensington Palace, watching London's Christmas lights blur through the glass like fallen stars. The city sparkled below her, but inside apartment 1A, the silence was deafening. William and Harry were with Charles at Sandringham. Diana had declined the invitation, citing a migraine, but the truth was simpler. She couldn't bear another Christmas performance, another evening of practiced smiles, while photographers captured every forced moment of family unity. The palace staff had left early, eager to reach their own families. Diana had insisted they go, watching their faces light up as they spoke of Christmas Eve traditions. Now she stood alone in rooms that felt more like a museum than a home. She traced her finger along the cold window pane, leaving a small smudge that would be polished away by morning. Everything in her life was polished away by morning, including her own authentic emotions. Diana pressed her forehead against the glass. For a moment, she wasn't the Princess of Wales. She was just a 32-year-old woman who felt more alone on Christmas Eve than she had ever felt in her life. That's when Diana made the decision that would change everything. She needed to disappear, just for one night. One night where she could be invisible instead of the most photographed woman in the world. But Diana had no idea that someone else in London was having the exact same thought. 20 minutes later, Diana stood in a small charity shop in Covent Garden, pulling a simple black coat over dark jeans, her hair tucked under a knit hat. She had driven herself there, something that would have horrified her protection officers. The shop was run by Mrs. Patterson, who had been sorting donated clothes for 30 years without looking up at customers' faces. Diana had discovered this place during an official charity visit, remembering how Mrs. Patterson treated her like any other person. As Diana checked her disguise in the mirror, the shop's bell chimed. Another customer entered, bringing cold December air and distant Christmas carols. Diana glanced up and froze. The man pulling off his leather jacket was tall, dark-haired, with the kind of face that belonged on album covers. But like Diana, he was clearly trying not to be recognized. Baseball cap pulled low, sunglasses despite the evening hour, deliberate scruff changing his usual appearance. George Michael caught her eye in the mirror and stopped mid-motion. Two of the most famous faces in Britain, both dressed down, both running from something. The recognition was instant and mutual, but so was understanding. "Evening," George said quietly. "Evening," Diana replied, equally careful. Mrs. Patterson looked up briefly from her sweaters. "You two know each other? That's lovely." She returned to her sorting, oblivious to witnessing a meeting between two of the most recognizable people in the world. "Excuse me," George said finally, approaching her with genuine curiosity. "This might sound strange, but you look like you're planning to disappear tonight." Diana turned to face him properly. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone planning the same thing," George smiled genuinely. "Though if I didn't know who you really were, I wouldn't look twice. That's quite a skill." "Where were you planning to disappear to?" Diana asked. George considered her, weighing whether to trust her with the truth. "Honestly, I was thinking of walking around, finding people who could use help tonight. Christmas Eve, you know. The kind of help that doesn't require a photo opportunity." Diana felt something shift in her chest. Behind the casual disguise, she could see the same weariness she felt. The exhaustion that came from being constantly watched, constantly performing. "That sounds like exactly what I was looking for." George studied her face. "You know that's probably the most dangerous idea either of us has ever had." "Probably," Diana agreed, "but also possibly the most honest thing either of us has done in years." "One condition," he said. "If at any point this gets complicated, we call it off." Diana extended her gloved hand. "Deal." As Mrs. Patterson rang up their scarves, Diana caught George's eye in the mirror. Something had shifted between them. They were no longer two celebrities hiding from the public eye. They were two people who had found unexpected understanding. 25 minutes later, Diana was walking through London streets without protection for the first time in over a decade. The sensation was terrifying and exhilarating. Every instinct told her this was dangerous, but every human instinct told her it was necessary. George carried a bag filled with sandwiches and hot drinks they'd purchased from an all-night cafe. He hadn't asked where the money came from when Diana insisted on paying, understanding instinctively that this small act of independence meant something important to her. "There," George said, nodding toward a figure in a doorway. "That's Margaret. I've seen her here before." Diana followed his gaze to an elderly woman reading by torchlight against a closed bookshop. She was wrapped in multiple layers of clothing, but her posture was dignified, her attention completely absorbed in whatever book she held. "You've done this before?" Diana asked. "Sometimes, when the walls feel too close, when the studio feels too small, when I need to remember there's a world outside record sales and review columns." They approached Margaret, who looked up with sharp, alert eyes that missed nothing. Diana felt immediately assessed but not judged. There was something in Margaret's gaze that spoke of someone who had seen enough of life to understand its complexities. "Evening, Margaret," George said, crouching down to her level. "How's the book?" "George, my dear boy," Margaret smiled, and Diana was struck by how genuinely pleased she looked to see him. "It's wonderful. Agatha Christie. Murder on the Orient Express. Have you read it?" "I haven't, but I've heard it's brilliant," George replied, settling more comfortably on the pavement. "Margaret, I'd like you to meet my friend, Diana." Diana knelt beside George, grateful for the simplicity of the introduction. "Hello, Margaret. What do you think of the book so far?" Margaret's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. "Oh, it's marvelous. Everyone on the train has secrets, you see. Everyone is hiding something important. But Dame Agatha doesn't let anyone stay hidden forever. The truth has a way of coming out, doesn't it?" Diana felt the words resonate more deeply than Margaret could have intended. "Yes, I suppose it does." "Are you cold?" George asked, pulling one of the hot drinks from his bag. "We brought tea." "Bless you. That's lovely." Margaret accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping her fingers around it for warmth. "Most people walk right past. They look, mind you, but they don't see. Do you understand the difference?" Diana nodded, understanding perfectly. She had spent years being looked at without being seen, being photographed without being known. "What about you, dear?" Margaret asked Diana. "Do you enjoy mysteries?" "I'm learning that I do," Diana replied, "though I'm finding that the most interesting mysteries aren't in books. They're in people." Margaret studied Diana's face with the intense attention that only someone accustomed to reading people for survival could manage. "You have kind eyes," she said finally, "but sad ones, like you've been carrying something heavy for a long time." The observation was so accurate that Diana felt tears threaten to form. "Sometimes the heaviest things are the ones you can't put down," she said quietly. "Ah," Margaret nodded knowingly, "the invisible burdens. Those are the worst kind. People can see when you're carrying groceries or luggage. They can't see when you're carrying expectations, disappointments, other people's dreams for your life." George glanced at Diana, and she could see recognition in his eyes. They both knew about invisible burdens. "The thing is," Margaret continued, warming her hands on her teacup, "sometimes the only way to put those burdens down is to pick up something else, something you choose for yourself." They sat together for nearly an hour, and Margaret told them about her life with the matter-of-fact dignity of someone who had learned to find meaning in small moments. She had been a librarian before retirement, she explained, had read thousands of books, met thousands of people through the pages she turned. Her daughter lived in Australia now, couldn't visit but sent letters faithfully every month. "She worries about me, bless her," Margaret said with a fond smile. "But I tell her, I'm exactly where I need to be. These streets, these books, these conversations with people like you, this is my life now. Not what I planned, perhaps, but what I've made of what life gave me." Diana was struck by Margaret's contentment, her ability to find peace in circumstances that would terrify most people. "Aren't you lonely?" she asked gently. "Sometimes," Margaret admitted. "But there's a difference between being alone and being lonely, isn't there? I choose to be alone. That makes it different." When it was time to move on, Margaret reached into her coat and pulled out a small, carefully folded piece of paper. "I copy down quotes from the books that speak to me," she explained. "This one seemed like it might speak to you, too." Diana unfolded the paper and read, "The impossible could not have happened. Therefore, the impossible must be possible in spite of appearances." "Thank you," Diana whispered, tucking the paper carefully into her coat pocket. "Remember," Margaret said, her eyes twinkling in the lamplight, Sometimes the most important truths are hiding in plain sight. As they walked away from Margaret's doorway, George was quiet for several steps. Finally, he spoke. "She doesn't know who you are, does she?" "No," Diana replied. "For once, someone is talking to me because they want to, not because protocol demands it. How does that feel?" Diana considered the question as they turned down another street, their breath visible in the cold December air. Like coming up for air after being underwater for years. That's when they saw her. Under a broken streetlight that flickered intermittently, a young woman sat on the steps of a closed church. She was rocking slightly, and even from a distance, they could see she was holding something against her chest. "She's got a baby," George said quietly. Diana's maternal instincts activated immediately, the same powerful pull she'd felt when William and Harry were small and needed her. As they approached, details became clearer. The woman couldn't have been older than 19, with short brown hair and a face that might have been pretty if it wasn't etched with exhaustion and worry. She was wrapped in a thin jacket that was clearly insufficient for the December cold, holding a bundle that was unmistakably an infant. "Excuse me," Diana said softly, not wanting to startle her. "Are you all right?" The young woman looked up, and Diana's heart broke at what she saw in her eyes. Fear, exhaustion, but also a fierce protectiveness that Diana recognized from her own experiences as a mother. "We're fine," the woman said, though her voice shook slightly. "Just resting." George sat down on the church steps, deliberately making himself less imposing. "I'm George, and this is Diana. What's your name?" The woman hesitated, clearly weighing whether these strangers could be trusted. Diana could see the internal calculation, the desperate need for help warring with the instinct to protect her child from potential danger. "Sarah," she said finally, "and this is Emma." She looked down at the baby in her arms with an expression of pure love that made Diana's chest tighten with recognition. "She's beautiful," Diana said, and meant it. Even in the dim, flickering light, she could see the baby's perfect features, the way her tiny hand curled around Sarah's finger. "How old is she?" "6 weeks yesterday." Sarah's voice was soft with wonder, as if she still couldn't believe she was someone's mother. "She's the most perfect thing I've ever seen." Diana settled onto the steps beside Sarah, ignoring the cold stone against her legs. Something about this young mother called to every protective instinct Diana possessed. Being a new mother is incredible, isn't it? But also terrifying. "I remember feeling like I didn't know what I was doing half the time." Sarah looked at Diana with surprise. "You have children?" "2 boys. They're older now, but I remember those first weeks. The way they feel so fragile, but also so strong. The way they change everything about how you see the world." "Yes," Sarah breathed, clearly relieved to find someone who understood. "Exactly like that. Like everything matters more now, but also like I'm completely unprepared for how much it matters." Diana watched Sarah adjust Emma's blanket with tender precision, the automatic movements of a mother who was constantly attuned to her child's needs. Even in these desperate circumstances, Sarah's love for her daughter was evident in every gesture. "Sarah, do you have somewhere warm to stay tonight?" George asked gently. Sarah's expression closed off slightly, the walls going up that Diana recognized from her own experiences with intrusive questions. "We're managing fine." "I'm sure you are," Diana said gently. "You're obviously a wonderful mother. But it's Christmas Eve, and it's freezing, and sometimes accepting help isn't about not being strong enough. Sometimes it's about being smart enough." Something in Diana's tone must have reached Sarah, because the defensive posture relaxed slightly. "The hostel was full," she admitted quietly. "They said to try again tomorrow, but they can't promise anything. And some of the places, they're not safe for a baby. There are people there who are sick or angry or just not well. I can't risk Emma being around that." "How long have you been on your own?" Diana asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Since Emma was born," Sarah replied. "Her father, well, when I told him I was pregnant, he made it very clear that he wasn't interested in being responsible for anyone else. Said I was trying to trap him." She paused, then continued with quiet dignity. "And my family, they're not bad people, but they're very traditional. A baby without a marriage, a daughter who won't follow their plan for her life. They said I'd made my choice, and now I had to live with the consequences. Diana felt a familiar fire building in her chest, the same righteous anger that drove her charity work. How was it possible that a young mother and her baby had nowhere safe to go on Christmas Eve? How could people turn away from someone who needed help so desperately? That must have been incredibly difficult, Diana said. The hardest thing I've ever done, Sarah agreed. But also, she looked down at Emma, who was now sleeping peacefully. The most important thing I've ever done. She deserves better than people who would see her as a mistake or a disappointment. She deserves to grow up knowing she's wanted and loved and valued for exactly who she is. Those words hit Diana with unexpected force. Here was this 19-year-old girl, homeless and struggling, who understood something about unconditional love that took most people decades to learn. There's a 24-hour cafe about 6 blocks from here, George said. It's warm, it's safe, and the owner's a friend of mine. Would you let us walk you there? Buy you some dinner? Sarah looked between Diana and George, clearly trying to figure out if this offer was genuine. Why would you do that? She asked. You don't know us. Diana reached out slowly and gently touched Emma's tiny hand. The baby stirred slightly but didn't wake. Because everyone deserves to be warm and safe on Christmas Eve, and because being a mother is hard enough without having to worry about basic things like food and shelter. Because, George added, sometimes helping someone else is the only way to feel human again. The cafe was exactly what George promised. Warm, quiet, run by Antonio, who greeted them without questions but with genuine warmth. Sarah's face changed as the heat began to penetrate the cold that had settled in her bones. Emma stirred in her arms, making soft baby sounds that spoke of contentment rather than distress. Order whatever you want, Diana said, meaning it. And don't argue with me about it. Sometimes accepting generosity is a gift you give to the person offering it. Sarah studied the menu with the careful attention of someone who hadn't seen this many food options in weeks. When the waitress came over, she ordered soup, bread, and tea, her voice betraying how long it had been since she'd had a proper meal. As they waited for the food, George began humming quietly, a melody Diana recognized after a moment. Careless whisper, but stripped of all its pop production, sung like a lullaby. Emma seemed to respond to the music, her tiny features relaxing even further into sleep. You have a beautiful voice, Sarah said to George. Are you a musician? George and Diana exchanged a glance. Something like that, George replied with a smile. The food arrived and Diana watched Sarah try to eat slowly and politely, despite obvious hunger. After a few bites, Sarah's shoulders relaxed in a way that spoke to how long it had been since she'd felt truly safe. This is wonderful, Sarah said. I can't remember the last time food tasted this good. When you're a new mother, you forget to take care of yourself, Diana observed. I used to go all day without eating because I was so focused on my baby's needs. But you had help, didn't you? Sarah asked. Family, staff, people to remind you to eat. Diana considered how to answer truthfully without revealing too much. I had people around me, yes, but not all help is helpful, if you know what I mean. Sometimes the people who are supposed to support you have their own ideas about what you should do, how you should behave, what kind of mother you should be. Sarah nodded knowingly. Yes, everyone has opinions about what's best for your baby, but they don't have to live with the consequences of those opinions. Exactly. And sometimes the most important thing you can do as a mother is trust your own instincts, even when everyone else is telling you you're wrong. They talked for over an hour about motherhood and independence, about the difference between being alone and being lonely, about the way having a child changed how you move through the world. George contributed to the conversation with easy warmth, but Diana could see him watching both women with genuine interest and care. I was training to be a nurse before Emma came along, Sarah said during a lull in the conversation. I had to stop when I got pregnant, but I was good at it. I'm good with people, good in emergencies. I just need to finish my certification, but that requires being stable somewhere for a few months. What made you want to be a nurse? Diana asked. Sarah's face lit up with the first genuine smile Diana had seen from her. I wanted to help people when they were vulnerable, when they were scared. I know what it feels like to be in a situation where you're completely dependent on the kindness of strangers. When Emma woke up and began to fuss, Sarah immediately went into feeding mode. She looked around the cafe nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of nursing in public. "There's a private room in the back," Antonio said, appearing beside their table as if he'd been waiting for exactly this moment. "Very quiet, very warm. You take as long as you need." After Sarah disappeared into the back room with Emma, George turned to Diana. "She's remarkable, isn't she?" "Extraordinary. 19 years old, completely on her own, and she's being a better mother than some people with every advantage in the world. What you said earlier, about helping someone else being the only way to feel human again. Did you mean that?" "Absolutely," George replied. "When everything in your life becomes about image management and career strategy, you start to forget what actually matters. Tonight, talking to Margaret, sitting here with Sarah, this is the most real I've felt in months." Diana understood exactly what he meant. For the past few hours, she hadn't thought about photographers or protocols. She had simply been a person helping others, connecting on the most basic human level. "George," Diana said, "I have an idea." When Sarah returned with a content Emma, Diana leaned forward. "Sarah, Antonio runs an informal network helping people find safe places. Would you be interested?" Sarah looked wary. "I don't want charity. It's community," Antonio said. "People who understand that sometimes life hits hard and you need support to get back on your feet." Antonio explained about his sister's medical clinic needing someone with medical training for administration. "There's an apartment above, safe, warm, private, and my sister loves babies." Diana watched hope replace resignation on Sarah's face. "Part-time to start, but it pays fairly, and you could finish your nursing certification." "Why are you doing this?" Sarah asked, voice thick with emotion. "I'm nobody." Diana took Sarah's hand. "You're a mother who gave up everything to protect her child. You chose love over convenience, courage over comfort. You deserve every good thing." Sarah began to cry. Tears of relief, gratitude, hope. Diana handed her a napkin, letting her process the emotion. "I've been so scared," Sarah whispered. "So tired of being strong." "You don't have to pretend anymore," George said gently. As midnight chimed Christmas Day, Diana felt deep satisfaction at making real, immediate difference through human connection. Before leaving, Sarah pulled them into a heartfelt hug. "Thank you. I don't have words for what this means." Outside, the three stood in cold Christmas air. "Well," George said, "that was unexpected." "The best things usually are," Diana replied. As they parted ways, George said, "Maybe the world needs someone who can bridge those two things, Princess and just Diana." Diana considered his words. "Tonight I got to remember what it feels like to just be human. I needed that more than I realized." "We should do this again," George said. They exchanged numbers on cafe napkins and hugged goodbye like old friends. As Diana's taxi headed to Kensington Palace through the quiet Christmas morning streets, she reflected on the evening. Margaret with her insights about invisible burdens and the wisdom found in books. Sarah with her fierce maternal love and quiet courage. George with his understanding of public expectations versus human needs. For one night, Diana had stepped outside royal protocol and rediscovered something essential. She wasn't just the Princess of Wales. She was also Diana, who could sit on church steps and connect with strangers as equals. The palace came into view, dark against the Christmas sky. Soon she'd resume her royal persona, but tonight had changed something important. Diana had remembered that beneath protocol and expectation, she was still a person who could make real differences in real lives. She pulled Margaret's quote from her pocket, reading it by streetlight. "The impossible could not have happened. Therefore, the impossible must be possible in spite of appearances." Tomorrow, Diana would have a small gift delivered to the clinic for Emma, along with books for Sarah and a card reading, "For New Beginnings. Love, Diana." As Princess Diana finally went to sleep on Christmas morning, she was already planning her next disappearance. Not to escape her responsibilities, but to remember what those responsibilities were really for. To bridge the gap between royalty and humanity, between duty and love. The night Diana vanished reminded her that sometimes the most important thing was simply to show up, pay attention, and care about strangers who needed to be seen. It would shape how she approached her royal duties forever, though the public would never know it started with a chance meeting in a charity shop and a Christmas Eve spent invisible on London's cold streets. On Christmas Eve 1994, Princess Diana disappeared for a few hours and discovered that her most meaningful moments might happen when no cameras were recording, when she was free to be exactly who she was meant to be. Just Diana, just human, just truly present.